The wind carried a chill that gnawed at the bones of anyone who dared walk along the overgrown path leading to the old asylum. Ivy choked the crumbling walls, and the windows, broken and gaping like empty eyes, reflected nothing but darkness. Most people in the nearby town avoided this place altogether. They said it was cursed, that those who entered rarely returned the same. Even those who left returned quiet, hollow-eyed, as if some part of their soul had been left behind within those walls. But curiosity, or perhaps something darker, always drew people to it. Alex had never been the superstitious type. At least he liked to think he wasn't. When his friends dared him to spend a night inside the asylum, he accepted, partly out of bravado, and partly because something about the abandoned building called to him in ways he didn't understand. They arrived just as the last light of the sun sank beneath the horizon, and the sky above turned a bruised purple, streaked with clouds that seemed to move unnaturally fast. The front doors, once painted a cheerful white, were now grey with rot, their wood swollen and splintering. A faint smell of mildew and rusted metal drifted from inside, catching in Alex's throat as he pushed them open. The air beyond was colder, thick with a silence so complete it felt like it pressed against his eardrums. His flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, revealing glimpses of peeling wallpaper, cracked tiles, and the skeletons of old furniture draped in dust and cobwebs. As he stepped further in, the sound of his own breathing seemed obscene against the stillness. There was a faint scuffing sound above him, from the second floor, where the ceiling groaned under some invisible weight. Alex paused, heart hammering, telling himself it was probably the wind, or perhaps an animal nesting somewhere. Yet every instinct in his body screamed that this building was alive in some way that defied explanation. The asylum had been abandoned for decades, but it was easy to imagine it in its former life. There were the faint outlines of patient rooms, long corridors stretching like veins through the building, and a central hall with a rusting staircase that spiraled upward. The walls were marred with scratches and what appeared to be faint stains that refused to be identified. Shadows pooled in the corners, as if the darkness itself had substance. Waiting, Alex moved cautiously down one of the narrower hallways. The air grew heavier with each step, carrying whispers that teased the edge of comprehension. He could swear he heard footsteps behind him, soft and deliberate. But when he spun around, there was nothing. His flashlight trembled in his grip. The whispers became slightly clearer, almost like fragments of words, half memories of suffering carried through the cracks of time. "Leave. Don't stay. We are here." A cold draft slithered down the hall, extinguishing his flashlight for a moment, plunging him into near-total darkness. Alex's hand shot out to relight it, and when the beam returned, the hallway looked slightly different. The doorways seemed closer together than before, the shadows deeper. A vague sense of being watched crawled over him, prickling his skin like tiny, icy fingers. He realized he could no longer distinguish the floor from the ceiling in the gloom. The asylum itself seemed to twist subtly. As though reshaping around him, he found himself drawn to a door at the far end of the hall, painted a dull green that had long since faded and peeled. Something about it felt wrong. Not in a threatening way exactly, but in a way that made the air thicken and the room behind it hum with energy. He hesitated but slowly turned the knob. Inside was a small room, perhaps once used for solitary confinement or as an office. A single chair sat in the center, facing the corner. On the walls, he noticed faint drawings etched into the plaster, lines and shapes that almost seemed to shift when he looked away. Grotesque faces twisting in silent agony. He stepped closer, drawn inexplicably to the chair. As he did, the whispers grew louder, forming sentences now, clearer and more menacing. "You see us, we see you. Trapped." His stomach churned. a cold sweat coating his skin. He wanted to leave, to run out into the open night where reality made sense. But some invisible tether held him in place. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him with a force that made the walls shudder. Alex spun around, chest heaving, but there was no one there. The room seemed to pulse with a heartbeat of its own, rhythmic and oppressive. He backed toward the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers swelled, overlapping into a cacophony of desperate pleas and screams. Faces seemed to form in the corners of the room, spectral and translucent, their eyes hollow, mouths moving soundlessly. A shadow detached itself from one of the walls, coalescing into a form that resembled a figure draped in tattered hospital gowns. It moved without sound, its presence radiating a cold, almost spiritual hunger. Alex stumbled back, tripping over the chair, and fell to the floor. His flashlight flickered wildly, casting grotesque, elongated shadows across the room. And in that moment, he understood something terrifying. The asylum had not simply been abandoned. It had been waiting for someone like him, someone foolish enough to trespass, someone alive, to feed the lingering despair trapped within. He scrambled to his feet and pressed himself against the far wall, trying to control his racing breath. The figure didn't approach. It lingered, as if savoring his fear, and then, impossibly, multiplied. Now the corners of the room were crowded with these spectral patients, all silent, all staring, all waiting. The air felt thick, almost viscous, pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. Alex's mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, but logic faltered against the palpable terror, against the unnatural distortion of the asylum's walls and space. The whispers turned into a chant, almost hypnotic, repeating over and over, "Stay, stay forever. Join us." Alex's fingers clawed at the door handle again, then the chair, then the floor, anything to break the invisible hold. He realized with dawning horror that the asylum wasn't just a building. It was an entity, feeding off fear, growing stronger the longer he stayed, shaping reality to trap him within its labyrinthine corridors. The first hints of dawn barely touched the edges of the windows, but the shadows in the room did not recede. The spectral figures began to edge closer, their faces more grotesque, eyes pleading and accusing at once. Alex's mind teetered on the edge of panic and madness. He understood in a gut-squeezing instant that leaving was not just a matter of walking out. The asylum had marked him. It knew him, and it would not let go. The last thing he felt before the room seemed to swallow the sound, the light, and the air around him was a presence at his shoulder, a cold hand resting lightly, almost tenderly, on his back. It whispered, just behind his ear, a voice not his own, but echoing deep inside him. "Welcome home." The hand on Alex's shoulder burned cold, as though it were made of ice and shadow, and yet he couldn't move. Every muscle in his body felt like it had turned to stone, his mind screaming for some escape that no longer existed. The whispers that had begun as faint echoes now surged into his skull like a tidal wave, voices layered upon voices, some pleading, some laughing, some screaming in a pain so raw it made his stomach lurch. The spectral figures circled him now, moving in impossible, jerking motions, their eyes hollow, yet filled with intent. He tried to shut his eyes, tried to convince himself that he could wake up from this nightmare. But when he opened them again, the room had changed. The walls were no longer cracked plaster. They were raw flesh, pulsating slightly as though breathing. The floor beneath him seemed alive too, softening and undulating like some organic tissue, swallowing his shoes slightly with each step. The air smelled of iron and decay, heavy with a faint undertone of something sweeter, almost intoxicating, that made his head spin. The whispers became words now, deliberate and targeted. "You belong here. You always belonged. We've been waiting." His own thoughts echoed these phrases. Or perhaps the asylum had stolen his mind and folded it into its own consciousness. Panic surged, and for the first time, Alex felt truly unmoored from reality. The spectral patients, no longer figures of shadows, were now fully corporeal in his vision, but with a sickly translucence. They reached toward him with fingers like twisted branches, eyes wide, mouths opening in silent screams. Alex ran, though he didn't know where to. The corridors had shifted, elongated and folded impossibly. Doors that should have led to exits opened into rooms filled with more specters, or staircases that rose infinitely, their steps uneven and threatening to collapse under the weight of unseen forces. Each corner he turned revealed a new horror, a fresh torment designed to drain his mind of reason. The air itself seemed to resist his movement, thickening, slowing, pressing down with a suffocating weight. Then came the voices that weren't whispers anymore, voices that spoke directly to him, intimately, as if they knew the darkest corners of his heart. "Fear us, accept us, let go." They mimicked the tones of his own friends, his family, voices he trusted, twisting them into something alien and accusatory. Each syllable clawed at his sanity, forcing him to doubt his own memory, his own identity. The asylum didn't just want to trap him physically, it wanted to consume him, to erase who he was, and leave behind only fear. Alex stumbled into a vast chamber, a former assembly hall of the asylum, now unrecognizable. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, shadowed by shapes that writhed and shifted in ways his mind refused to process. The floor glistened like wet stone, reflecting the twisted forms above. At the center of the room, a single chair sat on a raised platform. It was familiar, too familiar. He remembered it from the small room earlier, but now it was larger, more menacing, as if grown from the asylum itself. Drawn inexplicably, Alex approached the chair. As he did, the shadows coalesced around him into a vortex of faces, screaming and pleading, their mouths moving in silent terror. One of the figures stepped forward, taller and more defined than the rest. Its face was featureless, save for a pair of deep, black pits where eyes should have been. It extended a hand toward him, inviting, demanding, and Alex felt compelled to obey. Though every instinct screamed against it, he sat in the chair, and the moment he did, a cold darkness enveloped him. Not just outside, but inside. Memories that weren't his own flooded his mind. Screams from decades past, the echo of treatments and punishments, the despair of patients who had never left. He saw visions of the asylum as it once was. Cries for mercy, faces twisted in pain. Nurses and doctors are moving with cruel intent. And in the midst of it all, a sense of waiting, a knowing awareness that the asylum had been alive all along, feeding on the fear, despair, and souls of those unfortunate enough to wander inside. Time lost all meaning. Seconds stretched into hours, hours into days. He felt himself slipping, dissolving into the consciousness of the asylum, becoming one with the endless suffering, the echoes of lives destroyed. The chair beneath him became a throne, or a tomb. It was impossible to tell. The whispers had grown into a symphony, a relentless hymn of madness, chanting over and over, forever, forever, forever. A sudden flash of memory cut through, brief but intense. His friends waiting outside, calling his name, unaware of the nightmare inside. Something inside him screamed to break free, to cling to what little remained of his humanity. The pit-eyed figure leaned closer, its faceless head tilting in curiosity or mockery. Alex didn't know which. It reached inside his mind, and for a brief, terrifying instant, he felt the asylum probing his very soul. cataloging every fear, every doubt, every hidden corner of his psyche. But then, somewhere deep inside, a spark of defiance ignited. Alex forced his will against the oppressive presence, recalling something tangible, his own name, the feel of fresh air on his skin, the sun setting over ordinary fields, outside the asylum's reach. With a scream that felt like it would tear him in half, he wrenched himself from the chair, and the shadows recoiled, hissing and screeching as though struck. The air trembled, the walls shaking as if enraged by his rebellion. The corridors twisted violently, the building itself fighting to retain him. But Alex ran with every ounce of strength left. He ignored the whispers, the visions, the hallucinations, sprinting toward any exit his mind could recall. The front doors loomed ahead, cracked and splintered, yet tangible, reachable. He burst through them into the pre-dawn light, collapsing onto the dew-soaked grass. For the first time in what felt like eons, he breathed freely, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. But even outside he could feel it, an echo, a pull, a subtle vibration in his chest, as though the asylum itself had marked him. He looked back, the building silent and inert in the pale light, yet the shadows behind the windows hinted at a presence still watching, waiting. Alex ran toward the town, toward safety, but he knew, deep in his bones, that the asylum had not released.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.